However, some did not. What were the anti-federalist objections to the proposed constitution, and how did their political philosophy shape their objections? How did the Federalists respond to anti-federalist objections? Also, what was the ratification process for adopting the Constitution? What democratic principles did it reflect, and how did it succeed?
William Grayson wrote that the idea of consolidation is abhorrent to the people of this country. He and many other anti-federalists feared that the broad powers given to the federal government in the Constitution would lead to tyranny. They asserted that the United States was too large to govern from a central power. Therefore, the supremacy of states' rights would best reflect popular sovereignty. Anti-federalists primarily expressed their reservations through literature including the Anti-Federalist Papers and Federalist Farmer. George Mason wrote in objections to this Constitution that the representation provided to small states was not the substance but the shadow only of representation. He feared that their rights would not be represented because they could easily be outvoted by more populous states such as New York. He also distrusted the federal judicial branch's supremacy over state legislatures, believing they rendered laws tedious, intricate, and expensive, and justice unattainable, by granting the federal government potentially limitless power over the states. Perhaps their strongest objection to the Constitution was the lack of a Bill of Rights. They believed one was essential to uphold limited government by securing the natural rights of citizens from infringement, citing the necessary and proper and general welfare clauses, vague provisions which they feared could lead to tyranny if unchecked.
The Federalists responded to the anti-federalist objections by re-emphasizing fundamental constitutional principles and explaining the proposed Constitution in the Federalist Papers. Federalists addressed objections to a lack of popular sovereignty. Madison wrote in Federalist 10 that enlightened statesmen will not always be at the helm, but popular sovereignty is exemplified as citizens elect representatives to serve their interests and through the popular amendment to the Constitution. Federalists asserted that a limited government is well designed by the Constitution. Powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined, and those which are left to the states are numerous and indefinite, as Madison wrote in Federalist 45. Federalists believed that the Constitution proposed a structure for the federal government in which each of the three branches could check the others, limiting the power of any one branch. Madison concurs in Federalist 51 with anti-federalists in their belief that checks and balances are necessary, stating that if men were angels, no government would be necessary. In response to anti-federalist position, favoring a weak executive branch to avoid tyranny, Federalists extolled the virtues of separation of powers, relying on Montesquieu, who wrote that there can be no liberty where the legislative and executive powers are united in the same body.
The Constitution's ratification process was outlined in Article 7 of the document, requiring the ratification of the conventions of 9 states. State conventions were responsible for informing the citizens about the provisions of the Constitution and voting for ratification. The unanimous ratification that occurred by all 13 states ratifying caused unification under the new federal government. And the Constitution's ratification process also helped establish its legitimacy through republicanism. Representatives that would be elected to ratifying conventions were elected by the people, which also helped reflect popular sovereignty and embodied the Constitution's first 3 words, we the people. The inclusion of a Bill of Rights as the federal government's first order of business was also integral to successful ratification. Many states, such as Massachusetts and North Carolina, wouldn't ratify the Constitution until Federalists promised to include one. Ratification was also reflected majority rule in the states, as they were required the provision that 9 of 13 states ratify. The final result was a compromise between Federalists and anti-Federalists, considering their philosophies and arguments, which brought a combined philosophy to the new federal government. Anti-Federalist objections to the inequity of representation and the lack of a Bill of Rights was influenced by the strong beliefs in popular sovereignty and limited government. Federalists responded with the Federalist Papers, which extolled these virtues as the principles as carefully designed in the Constitution.
For the most part, do you agree with the Federalist or anti-Federalist position in government?
For the most part, I agree with the Federalist position in government because it is important to have a united central government. And you can see that without a united government, it would lead to a civil war, as it did, because the issue of states' rights versus the federal government's rights came to fruition in the Civil War.
I personally agree with the anti-federalist position more because I do believe that the United States is so large and its citizenry is so diverse that it's really impossible to effectively govern it from a central power, and it can lead, I think, too much power towards the federal government can lead to tyranny.
I would have to agree with the anti-federalist position as well, because in the United States we've had in the circumstances where people's natural rights were violated, and the rights in the Bill of Rights, such as the Alien Sedition Act, which came only short years after the Constitution was ratified, and in World War I with the Espionage Acts, which limited their freedom of expression.
Well, it leads to my question then. What ideas or concerns of the anti-federalists do you think still exist today?
I would say that the government's ability in regulating these rights, as interpreting them as non-absolute, has shown to be the most enduring issue. The First Amendment has been construed to provide different time, places, and manners in which it can be expressed, such as public places, schools, and other special locations. And we've had Supreme Court cases such as Hazelwood v. Cormier, which has helped to limit the students' rights in the schools, such as prior restraint on student newspapers in that case.
Anti-federalists also feared that without a Bill of Rights, the federal government would be able to encroach on the rights of its citizens. And even though a Bill of Rights has been added to the Constitution, there have been numerous instances throughout American history where the federal government has violated the rights of American citizens, such as in Korematsu versus the United States, where the Supreme Court upheld the internment of Japanese American citizens.
I believe that the anti-federalists believe that the federal government would mostly represent the wealthy elite. Is also pretty valid at this point. We are still looking for more campaign finance reform in the federal government, and that is yet to be solidified.
How and why do the delegates distribute governmental power between the national and state governments?
The issue of federalism and the federalism being the system by which the powers are delegated between the federal and state governments was decided based on the rights of the people. So, as the 10th Amendment states, any rights that are not delegated specifically to the federal government are left to the state governments. So, for example, the first article of the Constitution delegates extremely explained rights to the legislature. So, only the enumerated powers are those to the federal government.
States have the right to police themselves. They have the right to educate their citizens. They have the right to pass regulations that are more restrictive, but not necessarily less restrictive than the federal government. While the federal government can do things that state governments can't, including print money, regulate interstate commerce, and declare war.
Yeah, at the time of the constitutional debates and the Philadelphia Convention, they recognized that the Articles of Confederation were too weak to be able to have a loose confederation of states, though people's allegiances to their own states was still reigning high in that time. So they wanted to find an equal balance with federalism to be able to have certain rights in the states, but also in the central government, and being able to effectively have a union of states.
The anti-federalists were wary of factions. What was the Federalist response to this concern?
In the Federalist number 10, Madison actually addressed factions, and it's a check on the tyranny of the majority as described by Alexis de Tocqueville in Democracy in America. So it was addressed as being a check on the majority.
The way the Federalists addressed the anti-federalist concern of tyranny of the majority was by the inclusion of the Electoral College, where even if you have an actual majority of United States citizens elect the president, as we've seen in the election of President Donald Trump and the election of President George Bush, even with the majority of citizens electing the president, the majority of electoral votes is needed.
Why did the anti-federalists insist upon the addition of a Bill of Rights to the Constitution?
The anti-federalists felt as if the Constitution did not specifically list rights that they believe were fundamental to a democratic government. At this time, the abuses of the British, such as prior restraint of the newspapers, they cited that they burnt their towns, plundered their seas, and they had quartering the soldiers. So these are specific rights that they wanted to see protected in the Bill of Rights. Oh, may I briefly conclude?
You can finish your thought if you'd like, or?
All right, thank you. So they wanted to be able to have effective checks and ensure their rights that the Constitution they felt was vague.
Thank you. Well done.
Thank you very much.
Big round of applause.